And that's kind of what won it for Todd, because he had such a hero advantage at the end that really, even though he had an army advantage, it would have made a lot more of a difference in the way that battles would have played out if they were a lot more even. So Soju's decision not to set up an expo was kind of a bad one. And as I was saying, if you monitor people's creeping patterns, you can tell, just where they're creeping, what they should have for items, what they could have for items, what you should be looking out for. And if you are scouting out, where they're creeping, you should be able to figure out where you can creep jack them and their not their hero composition, their army composition, and be able to more effectively counter them. Which is kind of an important part that I see a lot of players just don't decide to do. They kind of go around creeping on their own. It also helps for scouting expos and for figuring out if they should have healing scrolls or not. Because if they haven't crept out a shop, chances are they're not going to go to a shop that you've crept out. The thing I find very effective about knowing where people are creeping is you find certain key areas that the player will need, such as an expo and a shop. And what you do is you find ways to creep in around that area. That way it makes it a lot more difficult for them to be able to pick up advantages off these areas. So like on Lost Temple, if they're going to be creeping, their natural expo, it's good to be creeping out things around the middle and try and gain an advantage by creeping a whole bunch of small camps really quickly and then going after their base. This way you can contain them a lot more and gain a larger map control. Also, things like on Turtle Rock with the Watcher Ward, if you can creep out those shops a lot quicker, you can tell when they're heading to the shops, and that way you can see exactly what they're picking up. And, if they are picking something up and you're nearby and you're creeping in around those areas like you should be, like the one camp that didn't get cred that entire game was the little corner camps with the 2 trolls and the 2 ogres. I find if you just creep those out and you know that they're in around that area because you've been watching where they're creeping, that if they do go to the shop, they'll usually send their, they'll just pack in to that little shop, and they really won't have good position if you come and flank them from behind, especially if you have the Watcher Ward, so you can tell how good their positioning is, and maybe you can snipe some things behind the trees if you have some ranged units and stuff. It really all depends on where they decide to creep and what they're actually going for, which is the hardest thing to figure out. As a human player, the most important thing that a Night Elf player will probably go after is not the expo, but more the shop. As a Night Elf player, you want to watch out for the human player who will more likely than not be going after the expos, which is also a good thing to have those scout wisps running around, which Soju didn't really do much of. I guess it's kind of a player choice because you do lose a lot of wisps in that little, maneuver. And that way, you lose the 60 gold, you have to dispel something, they gain 20 experience, whatever. 20 experience doesn't really make much of a difference except for early game. Early game, you just want to make sure that they don't get to level 2 a lot quicker than you do, because if they get to level 2 and then they get to level 3 before you get to level 1, it's kind of a pain in the ass. But with the Scout Wisps, what you do is you monitor where they are creeping. So if you see them coming, which is what I do a lot, I watch the minimap more than I should. But if you do watch the minimap, what you do realize is that, people are coming, you might as well move the Wisp. And then you move the Wisp to a close location, probably one that they won't be going past, so you don't lose the Wisp. And then that way, if you have it hotkeyed or something, and you can just go over while you're creeping something fairly safe. I mean, with Night Elf, you're really not going to lose many units creeping unless you're at Tier 1, which then you're more likely to lose a bunch of archers. But if you have a bunch of bears, and you have a Rejuve DH, you might as well go over, click, drag the Wisp, and send it into the area where the expo might be going up, well, where any expo might be going up. It just makes it a lot more effective. Especially, positioning your Wisps is kind of a hard thing to do to make them very effective. But the one thing that is great about that map is you have the Watcher Ward, so Scout Wisps aren't really as important at the shops. All you really want to do is keep one near the, what are those called? It's an orange camp with the 2 trolls and the ogres. I should give it a name or something. Camp 2. I don't know, Camp B. Something. I'll come up with something later. But what you do is you put a Wisp near the little area of trees, which is just across from that little creep camp, if you know what I'm talking about. That way you can be able to scout 3 different expos very quickly, and you just right-click and then shift-click back to the tree, or shift-click it to 3 little areas. The best time to do it is at night or when you're using a Moonstone. Moonstones really only give you 20 to 30 seconds, so it's really not as effective to use. But at night you have so much time that you can just run around it and scout those out and see which ones are crept and which ones could be possible expansion areas. Also, if they haven't crept a camp out and they've been doing a lot of creeping, you might as well be able to gather your army just outside one of those camps, especially if they've been creeping in that area, and you know they've been creeping there because you have the wisps there. Like, if you send a wisp to a camp and there's a whole bunch of corpses, obviously they've been creeping nearby, so you should be able to bring your army, especially a Night Elf army. Human armies are kind of a little slower, just because of the footmen and the sorcerers and stuff, but Dryads and Bears, rather quick. Well, I guess Bears aren't as quick. But anyways, what you do is you bring it into that area, and you should be able to determine when they're creeping there. And what you can do is just drag the wisp in and out and have it patrol, so it doesn't attract the creeps, but it doesn't attract the other players' attention. And that way they can think, oh, they just scouted there, they're probably not around that area. So then they go to creep, and you catch them way out of position. You probably might make them waste a TP. You'll probably pick off a couple units, and it just becomes much of a pain. As far as strategy goes, Todd really didn't do much out of the ordinary. He did the breaker caster thing with a couple morts. Usually you don't want to be going mortar teams unless you have an expo up, because they are fairly expensive and they do cost a lot of wood, so you have to be building more peasants and stuff. Set up a lumber mill, maybe get that little research, which is super awesome, that isn't really researched often. I usually, other than, getting a whole bunch of peasants or whatever, I go and buy a goblin shredder, but on Turtle Rock it's a different story. So you really want to be spending a lot more money on the lumber upgrades and peasants just to be able to get the mortar teams. They're just so effective against, what are those called? Dryads, especially because they have the unarmored. They're kind of quick, and the mortar teams do a whole bunch of AoE damage. So even though they kind of dodge, you'll still be doing some amount of damage to them, and they're also not doing any damage output because they're running back and forth, and they won't be abolishing things as much because they're obviously trying to dodge you. It gives them something more to think about other than their bears, which are being slowed, and they won't be abolished because, well, they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Also, I kind of prefer to go tier 3 to get some knights. I guess it's really player preference. I find that knights are really good for countering things like bears and other big urins. Wow, that was smart. Other big units like mountain giants, which nobody seems to get anymore, which I love. Sigh. Anyways, I like to get knights just because they're so much more of a meat shield than a breaker is, and breakers take so much damage from bears that they kind of get ripped to shreds at the front. But I guess if you kind of have an economic advantage, you should be able to outmass breakers compared to their stupid bears. Especially because I guess knights are kind of the same move speed. They're only 30 gold more, and they have like 300 more hit points. They also do a lot more damage output. They have more armor. They sound a lot cooler when they talk to you. They ride on horses, stuff like that. The only thing that you'll need Spellbreakers for eventually is you'll just need 1 or 2 for the rejuve. And if you do have the priest upgrade, you almost don't need them at all unless you want to steal the rejuve for yourself. Like in smaller unit battles, a breaker is always good to have with you because you're going to be having a lot smaller unit combinations, so you're going to have a lot less units. They're probably going to be weaker because it's been in a bigger battle. If you have an expo, well then obviously it is going to be a bigger battle because you'll have more units to deal with. Also, you should still have your heroes by then, otherwise you would have TP'd or something, or done something really stupid and not TP'd. But this way it just kind of ensures that you'll be rejuving something that's actually of value, because usually, small units die pretty quickly in big battles because of the AoE from things like Pit Lords and Naga Sea Witches and Demon Hunter sniping and Dryad sniping and good micro and stuff. So you won't have as many small units, and you'll have a whole bunch of big units that are being healed pretty rapidly from this rejuve and possible healing from your priests unless they've died. Also, I mentioned fairy dragons. It's kind of an important unit to have, actually. They're spell immune, so I don't know why you wouldn't get them. It kind of counters pretty much anything in the human army. All it really doesn't counter is the riflemen, which are being countered by bears, and all you really have to do as a human player to dodge them is have good positioning with your breakers or your knights. But as a night elf player, you do have the staff with you, and you should have 2 staffs with 3 heroes, so you should be able to get them out as fast as possible if they're being focus fired, which isn't really that big of a deal because they're kind of floating there, and all they're doing is a little bit of damage here and there, and they're probably more focused on getting rid of your bears, because otherwise you won't really have a meat shield, and then the bears will be attacking your riflemen directly. So everyone go out, have some fun this weekend, because that's always a good thing, and have a good day.